Okay, this is part 3 of section 8.1, and we are looking for the period. Okay, so we already said that b is 5, so period is 2 pi over the absolute value of b. Well, we're dealing with a positive number, so that absolute value doesn't really do anything. So it's going to be 2 over 5, and that will be our period. Okay, now since 2 pi over 5 is greater than 1, we're going to have horizontal compression for this particular equation right here. Okay, and notice we don't have any plus or minus some number, so that means that d here is actually 0, or our vertical shift is 0, so it doesn't go up or down, it just stays right where it is. Okay, now for y equals cosine of x plus pi over 3, notice I don't have another number other than 1 in front of cosine, so my amplitude is going to be 1. Since it's 1, I don't have any vertical stretching or compression. Our phase shift, now remember, I have to have a negative right there, so we could write this as cosine of x minus negative pi over 3. This right here would be our c value. This right here in front of x, which is just 1, would be our b value. So phase shift would be c over b, or negative pi over 3, that whole thing divided by 1, which would still just be negative pi over 3. So it's going to go to the left. Now again, there's two ways you can look at this right here and say, okay, well, I have a positive sign right here, so it's going to do the opposite. It'll go to the left. Or you can actually find the phase shift, and whatever sign we have here, okay, it's negative. Well, that means I have to go to the left. Okay, if I look at the equation, that sign positive there is going to be opposite, so I'm going to go to the left. When I look at the phase shift, it will, since it's negative, it'll do what, it's not going to be opposite is what I'm trying to say. You look at the equation, it will be the opposite of what you think. Look at the phase shift, it won't be the opposite of what you think. So I guess trying to keep those two separate from each other. Just pick one way and go with that on every single one of the examples. Okay, so since our b here is 1, that means the period, which is 2 pi over the absolute value of b, it's already a positive 1, so the absolute value is not going to get rid of that negative because we don't have 1. So 2 pi over 1 is just 2 pi, so we have no horizontal stretching or compression. And again, we don't have a plus or minus some number, so that means that d is 0, or phase shift is 0, so it doesn't go up or down. Okay, y is equal to 1/4 sine 2/3 x minus 3 pi. So our amplitude, remember, it's always the absolute value. So if this was, say, negative 1/4, then our amplitude would be a positive 1/4. So here we're going to have vertical compression, since it is less than 1. So we have vertical compression. Okay, phase shift. So what we can do is we can see that this is our c value, this is our b value. Or another, if we wanted to go ahead and have our phase shift just right in front of us, we could change this equation into this right here, basically factoring out the 2/3, which it might be easier for this one just to phase shift, which is c over b. So c is 3, because remember I already have a negative here, so I don't have to add a negative. So 3 over 2/3. Okay, so that's going to be 3 over 1. Keep that the same. Flip the bottom one. So that is 3 times 3 is 9 over 2. Oh, and, yep, I need my pi, because not just 3c is not just 3, it's 3 pi. So this will be 9 pi over 2 for my phase shift. Okay, so two ways of looking at it again. If we look at the equation, I see a negative sign. Negative makes me think that I need to go left, so I do the opposite. Since I'm looking at the equation, I go to the right. Or if I look at the phase shift, which is positive, I'm just going to go ahead and go to the right. Okay, period. So that is 2 pi over the absolute value of 2/3, which we don't really need the absolute values because it's already positive. So this is going to be 2 pi over 2/3. Let me move this. So that's going to be 2 pi over 1 times 3 over 2. The 2's cancel out, and I have 3 pi. So that means that I have horizontal stretching. And once again, we don't have a plus or minus some number, so that means that D is 0, or our vertical shift is going to be 0. Okay, so now we're changing gears just a little bit. Now we're going to graph these equations. So if we take y is equal to cosine of 2/3 pi. Now these are the steps. This is the easiest process for doing this. Whatever is in the parentheses, I'm going to put that between 0 and 2 pi. So 2/3 x between 0 and 2 pi. And then I'm going to solve for x, which means I need to multiply every single term by the reciprocal. So that'd be 3 over 2, 3 over 2, and 3 over 2. So 3 over 2 times 0, still 0. 3 over 3 and 2 over 2, they cancel out, and I'm left with 1. So just 1x or just x. 2's will cancel out here, and I'm left with 3 pi. Okay? So whatever you do to the x's here, you'll do to every single x. And what I mean by every single x, well, we have to go back to the very basic structure of what cosine of x is, which is what I have right here. Now remember, we started out with the angles 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Cosine started at 1 and then went to 0, -1, 0, and 1, going around that unit circle. Okay, so for these x values, which are just my angles, I'm going to multiply each one of those by a 3 over 2. Now, this is where you need to remember what affects your x values, what affects your y values. And that was way back at the beginning, right here. Notice that A and D will affect your y values. C or B and C will affect your x values. Or basically what is in the parentheses will affect your x values. What is outside of the parentheses will affect your y values. Okay, if we go back, notice I don't have anything here other than 1, and I don't have a plus or minus another number. So there's nothing here that would affect my y values. So just my x values are being affected. So I'm going to take each one of these and multiply it by 3 over 2 and get an answer for each one of those. So 3 over 2 times 0 would be 0. 3 over 2 times pi over 2 would be 3 pi over 4. 3 over 2 times pi will be 3 pi over 2. 3 over 2 times 3 pi over 2 would be 9 pi over 4. 3 pi over 2 times 2 pi would be 3 pi. Okay, notice how this first one here and this last one here, these answers, are the exact same as the first and last here. So those x values go between 0 and 3 pi. Okay, so I'm going to graph. So what we have here, we would have ordered pairs. So I take that 0 from my x values, comma, and then take this 1, and I plot that. And then take the 3 pi over 4, comma, 0 from this right here, plot that. And you'd keep on going down, plot each of those numbers. It would give you this graph right here. So notice here's my 0, 1, and then here's my 3 pi over 4, 0, and then my 3 pi over 2, negative 1, like we have right here, 3 pi over 2, negative 1, and then I need 9 pi over 4, 0, 9 pi over 4, 0, and then last one, 3 pi, 1, 3 pi, and back at 1. And remember, cosine makes this shape right here. So that is one fundamental cycle of y equals cosine of 2/3 x, right there. Okay, now if we compare it to the original just cosine, so here's cosine, just cosine right here, without any alterations to it. There's cosine. Okay, now what we have done is, notice that our b is less than 1. It is 2/3. Means we're stretching it out. Notice how cosine of 2/3 x is a little bit more stretched out than just cosine of x. Okay. Now we'll do the same process with this one. Whatever's in the parentheses, going to put that between 0 and 2 pi. So 3x, put that between 0 and 2 pi, and then I'm going to solve for x, which means I need to divide each term by 3, which the same thing is multiplying by 1/3. So that's what I'm going to do. Multiply by 1/3 to each term. Okay, so that's going to be 0 on this side. This will just be x, and then I'll have 2 pi over 3. Okay, now sine, get a little chart here. So we're going to have our same angles, 0 pi over 2 pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. But sine starts at 0 and then goes to 1, 0, negative 1, and then back to 0. Okay, so for each one of my x values, I'm going to multiply them by 1/3. And then figure out what that equals. Okay, so the first one would be 0, which is the same thing over here. This will be pi over 6, be pi over 3. This will be pi over 2. And we have 2 pi over 3. Okay, now notice I do have an amplitude. My amplitude is going to affect my y values. So here I'm going to multiply each one of these by negative 2. So I'll get a 0, negative 2, a 0, a positive 2, both of them are negative, and then a 0. Okay, so then we're going to plot 0, 0, right here, pi over 6, negative 2, pi over 6, negative 2. Let's see, pi over 3, 0, right here, pi over 2, 2, here, 2 pi over 3, 0, right here. And make this shape for sine. Remember, this is the one fundamental cycle for sine. Okay, so that right there is this graph. Okay, now here is just regular sine, and the other graph is the negative 2 sine of 3x. Notice how b is greater than 1, so it's horizontally compressed, so it's pushed in this way. And a is 2, so it is stretched up, and the negative will reflect across the x-axis.